Evolution Hour. RJ Downard here, Roland James Downard. Time for another exciting episode of Evolution Hour and the continuing story that never ends. The analysis of Contested Bones, which a critic of creationism said, hey, would you like to analyze this book? I'm really depressed at the thought of doing it myself. And I go, hey, yes. So he sent me the book and away we go. And I've been going week after week after week to ferret through and do a source analysis. Remember, source methods is my gig. I would like to thank also Strike for helping out in this period after Google Hangouts got axed. And Karis is going to be here. Hello, Karis. She's also keeping an eye on the live chat going on. And Jackson Wheat may be in a little bit later on. He had to work and he was just getting off at the time the show began. So if he materializes, we will be delighted. And if not, we'll also give some delightful plugs as to the projects that we're working on together. But anyway, back to Contested Bones. This is part of the young earth creationist opposition to human evolution. Duh. And those of you who've been following me the last weeks, you'll have spotted how I went through their various chapters on the various fossils, how they were suppressing information, how they never worked out what the hell they think was going on, how they were arbitrarily lumping ones as human beings that are actually our ancestors, Homo erectus and Homo habilis and all that. And they were just running and running and running on that. Well, now they're into the other shoe drop, which is they're young earth creationists, but they aren't exactly open about what they think and their chronology. Instead, they're just carping at the radiometric dating. And right at the moment, they're going on about potassium argon dating. Last week, if you saw the show and followed up on the links, or maybe it was a week or two ago, the same stuff that they were putting up on one page, a lot of it's getting repeated on the next page as another footnote, as though this were like a news bulletin. So it's an immensely repetitive task. I'm putting in and creating a bibliography so I can see what they've cited. They've got about 400 some odd sources so far in the book, which is averaging about 1.7 per page, which is not spectacularly large. And an awful lot of it, and particularly at critical junctures, is really old.
Size isn't everything.
Sizes and everything. Yeah, well, when it comes to documentation, it's not so much size, but relevance and correctness. So if you're trying to make the argument that cucumbers burst into flames when you say blurpnab at them, you can easily perform an experiment to say blurpnab at the vegetable, and if it bursts into flames, you have an experiment, and it should be reliable. Failure to show the experiment where the thing bursts into flame when you say blurpnab, that's a problem. And so when you're trying to make a positive argument by carping a series of negative arguments, you're in quite a bit of trouble. Tornado in a Junkyard says hi to us all. Yeah, well, we'll all keep turning up now. Brian Stevens is there, Old Scratch. We got TD Blurpnab. We have a lot of people in the Lisa for Truth. Hi. The gang is assembled, or assembled, as the case may be.
So yeah, sorry I was late. I thought the most professional thing I could think to do was to go get a bite of food just as the show is starting.
It well, that's what I have my iced tea, which I always drink out of a whiskey glass. As if
you said something about toast, so I needed toast.
And you get some toast. Yeah, many people's brains are toast, unfortunately. And the creationist argument. Let's get back to the creationist argument. As you know from source methods, the essence of it is the ability to see the primary source data. And so merely having a reference, an abstract, can be helpful in some contexts, but the really meat of the matter comes if you can see the original material. Tornado in Junkyard says, I talked to Dr. Dino earlier today, thanks to Look a Pig. Yes, and how is our Dr. Dino good? Is he just as head up his ass stupid as he was before? I'm kind of figuring that he probably is.
Oh, anyway. Go easy on him. It's not like he can see very well in there.
Yes. Well, suffering from cranial blockage of the rectum, yes, he does cut down on the visibility.
It's painful. Try it sometime.
And gymnastic. I mean, you got to give them credit for their ability to. That's not an easy thing to do and not make unpleasant. Tornado says, I told him exactly what I thought about his whole "you believe you came from a rock" comment. I'm sure his response was, as usual, informative. Anyway, the point about the source methods approach is to be able to see primary sources. And I've always tried to put a primary source full text available so that everybody can follow up on the material that I'm putting up so they can look for themselves. You don't have to take
For
my word.
those who are just tuning in, please explain to the audience the difference between a primary source and a secondary source.
Oh, that is an excellent question.
Just in a nutshell, if you can do it in 30 seconds or less.
The A primary source would be an original document that is making an assertion by the actual person doing the thing. So technical science papers are primary source documents. If you read a blog account talking about that science paper, that's now a secondary source. Now that secondary source becomes a primary source when you're talking about that person's comment. So you can have a primary source analysis of a secondary commenter by looking at what they actually say. But if you're making science claims or claims about history, for example, if you're trying to argue that Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter is a documentary, you're going to have to go at a way big layer of primary source material to be able to document that. And I would contend that you're never going to be able to do that. And the inability to tell the difference between a primary and a secondary source is a pathology of behavior among Tortugans, that they will read a secondary account that quote mines something, and they now think they know the original material and will quote. Darwin quotes are a common element here in the anti-evolution biz, where they'll quote something from Charles Darwin that they got from a secondary source. They don't realize they don't know what Darwin said. They only know what the secondary source says Darwin said.
Well, to be fair, though, I don't think the lack of knowledge of primary versus secondary sources is necessarily something that's isolated to just Tortugans
Oh
or
gosh, no.
to young Earth creationists. I think that's kind of across the board. I mean, except for those who regularly work with these things, these things. um, but I think it's a far more common problem than we know. It's not in any one
Oh,
specific
exactly. It's
group
not
or
not at
another.
all restricted to creationism. And the point is, and I know this from firsthand, that it comes from the human desire to imitate. And so if you're coming into a field you don't know much about and you latch on to somebody that you think is an expert and you copy their arguments, so now you appear to be an expert as well. Standing for Truth, who happens to be a creationist, is a perfectly fine example of that. I mean, he latches onto a whole bunch of stuff that he's gleaned secondarily from creationists. Now he appears to be erudite because he tosses off created heterozygosity and genetic entropy and could name drop Sanford and Tompkins, when all he's done is merely copy the secondary source analysis. And the inability to think on your own to construct what's the necessary argument to make a case. In order to make the case that, well, getting back to this radiometric dating example,
There we go. I was just going to get us back there.
yeah, back to the track. That one of the things that came about back in the 60s and 70s regarding dating volcanoes is the amount of argon or not in
That'd
them.
be a really weird Tinder profile.
Very weird Tinder profile, and a lot of spewing going on with that. Anyway,
Put down the
thing is,
towels for sure there.
volcanoes are formed from magma. Magma is not like the faucet spigot in your plumbing. It's something that's drawing on churning masses of rock that are of varying ages that get recycled and reformatted and then burble up and spurt out as a volcano. So it turns out that the presence or absence of things like argon and helium and other rare earth elements. Remember, argon is an inert gas. It doesn't form combinations with anything. And that can be kind of a nice thing, except and it's being produced in the radioactive decay cycles, but it can also stick around, or because it's a gas, it can percolate up out of or into a thing, depending upon whether the stuff melts. So imagine you have radiometric argon that has been formed in an ancient decay chain, and then the rock bubbles up and gets cycled into
Hold
an
on, you said K chain. Tell the audience what K chain is.
Oh, a decay chain. When you have a radioactive element, it turns into another element by giving off an alpha particle. It loses a proton and turns into another atom that way. And then it will, and if that's radioactive, it will decay. It will continue that chain of decay until it reaches something that isn't radioactive anymore. And that gets stuck. So, like for example, there are decay chains that will end up eventually as lead, and that particular isotope, it's the end of the road because that's not radioactive. And one example that pops up in polonium halos, which is another creationist thing, is the uranium decay chain generates radon, and then it produces polonium, which has a really short half-life. And so Robert Gentry, the creationist, was trying to argue that these little rings of radioactivity that were suggesting that there were polonium without there being the uranium decay chain missing. Well, it's because it came from the radon. Radon is a gas, an inert gas that will then move through and percolate through and shift its position, and it's radioactive, so it will produce a fresh decay chain that continues the path, but not where it started because it's a gas that's diffused. And so the failure to take into all this into account leads to some very bad science. Meanwhile, the real scientists are looking at things like that potassium and argon matter and realizing that you can actually tell stuff about the history of the volcanic deposit by the presence or absence and proportions of that argon compared to the other forms of argon, compared to helium, compared to different radiometric dating techniques of the same deposits, plus the kinds of crystals that are formed and all of the way these things connect up. In other words, you put all the pieces together. And what Rupi and Samford weren't ever doing, they haven't so far, is cite anybody that's putting the pieces together. Oh, Jackson Wheat may be looking for a link. Sai, you can keep an eye out for him in the Twitter feed because he's going to want to be able to come into the show and hopefully will be with us shortly.
He answers DMs.
Yeah, Tornado in a Junkyard says, decay chains, chemistry, finally someone who speaks English. Yeah, we have to remember that none of this is fantastically new in the big picture science thing, but it is stuff that really was coming into the fore within my lifetime. As they discovered more about radioactive material, and after World War II really began to use radioactive decay chains as a way of measuring the age of the Earth and working out a whole bunch of stuff. And the thing is what the creationists do is they home in on the part where they're just collecting the data and scratching their heads. Why is argon showing up here? Why are we getting discordant dates? Well, there's reasons why. So I put some papers up of the follow-up where they're looking at the implications of this material to make sense out of what's going on in magma chains. There's a couple papers from 2002 and 2004 that I put up that you can then follow up on and get caught up on this. And you have to ask, if Rupi and Samford are so bloody confident about their argument, why aren't they mentioning the follow-up stuff? If they want to make an argument that their follow-up is invalid, fine and dandy, but they're not mentioning that. Now, there's two possibilities. One, Rupi, who is a chemist and not a geochronologist, doesn't know about any of that stuff because all he's done is copy material from other creationists. We know from the source working that I've worked up so far, he's copied off of Steve Austin. He's copied off of Andrew Snelling. In other words, he would read a creationist piece, siphon their sources, which he may or may not have looked at directly, as if he had studied them himself. And we know this behavior takes place. Mike Riddle would riff off of Andrew Snelling. I've just found a thing where I'm doing some background research. I'll probably put some material in as a future evolution hour, where it turns out Andrew Snelling is relying in turn for some of his arguments on other creationists that he copies their sources into his argument. There's this stuff about chalk formation that I've been looking into because a creationist just lobbed the question, well, how do you account for the White Cliffs of Dover? Not by a flood. And so the whole bit about primary source itis is that if somebody brings up a primary source citation, especially if it's not a creationist source, they're saying this is a legitimate science paper that supposedly shows something that supports the creationist position. You want to look at it because the odds are it's not really doing that, and that there's misrepresentation of the material and data suppression. And clearly, Rupi has fallen into that when it comes to this potassium argon thing. Immutable Destinies, what a lot of creationists don't realize is chemistry, especially NMR-based studies for the structure of molecules, relies on radiometric dating and nuclear physics to be true. Yeah, that actually is an interesting thing in relation to all that anthropic fine-tuning argument, which is very common among intelligent design people and old Earth creationists, because
Jackson.
they're accepting the standard physics. But it's a thing that
Yes.
actually the young Earth creationists are kind of wary about wading into, because it depends on the physics being true. And they're out of their way arguing that, oh no, the physics is wrong, the Earth isn't really old, radioactive decay chains aren't really valid, things have been created with apparent age, or there's been an acceleration of decay rates during the flood week, or all sorts of wacky notions that they can't quite deal. Jackson is here. Hello, Jackson. Let's stop and say hi.
Well, hello. How are you guys doing?
Oh, well,
I just had toast, so I'm good.
yes. I happened to mention somebody whose brain was toast, or argument was toast, and suddenly she had to have some toast. So I'm a terrible influence on people.
Well,
I started the show and I was gone getting toast.
I'm seeing double on RJ.
Oh yeah, that's because of the pinning thing that Strike, the double image of me is actually Strikes. We worked out all of this. And Psy is here, but not here. He's muted. He is just acting as the emperor.
RJ is so nice, you could see him twice.
Yeah, well, my mug ain't that good looking. So
myself too little credit.
Bring everybody up to speed on where we are. I've mentioned it a little bit as to our Rocks Were There book that we are both having a field day writing.
Yeah, I'm going through chapter 6. I've sent you chapter 7 for editing. You sent me chapter 6 for final edits. Then you've got to write 8 and 9. I'm working on 10 currently, which is reading another one of Menton's chapters, which is watching paint dry.
Sad.
He is just he's so dull. I mean, dear Lord, he's dull.
Yeah, sack of hammers, obtuse in the case. And Menton is one of the kind of old guys in the field. An awful lot of the stuff that gets posted by Menton is not current. It's stuff he was writing 20 years ago at this St. Louis Post-Dispatch or something. He would write these little blurbs. Apparently he knew somebody there in the newspaper. And that gets reposted. And if you don't look at the little fine print, you might think, oh, this is from 2008 or 2012. No, it's like 1994, 1995. And so, but even the newer material he's written, he has not improved with age.
Oh, no, it's like he is not like fine wine or cheese or cigars, whatever.
Yeah, you've already seen, probably because I light into it, where I'm taking David Menton to task in the additions to chapter 6 on the matter of vestigial organs.
Yeah, he kind of tripped all over that. He likes to bring up a lot of data points, sort of. His material is certainly a lot denser than that of Bodie Hodges, for instance.
Yeah, but he's Hodge is gauze by comparison. Menton tries to be a detailed fiddler, but if he fiddles a detail, we're going to check it up, and he does not look good after that.
All right, radiometric dating.
Back to radiometric dating. Yes. Which we'll have a whole chapter 2 on that in the Rocks Were There, by the way, where we're going into a lot of these things. Anyway, actually, we're nearing completion on for about the half hour of the thing. I think I've said what I need to do. That the upshot of that is that Rupi and Samford have a stealth argument that the Earth is young, and for that they've got to get rid of radiometric dating, especially in relation to human evolution. And so they're engaging in a shell game. The next section, I've already glanced a little bit ahead in the chapter. They again reprise the same claims they were making about the KBS Tough, which was a long dispute about how do you date a deposit where there's this volcanic eruptions going on all the time. How do you know that the stuff that's there on the top layer is not older material that's been infused and thrown out during the volcano that lands on top of that? And so that was part of the trickiness of getting the KBS Tough dated. And they finally settled that by a variety of means. And I'm sure Rupi and Samford are going to manipulate their way around the stuff. So we'll continue for the next few minutes then also. we can let everybody know that you nasty little devil, you suggested an additional book that we will be doing after the rocks were there. It's not going to be about science per se.
It will have.
Why are we shushing?
It will have. This is a secret project. It will have elements of science in it, but it's not. It will not be as science oriented as rocks, for instance.
Although you would be surprised at how much of the science I'm already starting to format.
Listen closely, guys, for unintentional spoilers.
Yeah, well, I have actually alluded to it at various points, but we will but nevertheless, it's going to be.
Well, it's going to be a while before that we even get to starting on that, because you want to have a second edition.
Well, no, that actually is if there were. I'm still holding off on that, because I that would be one where I would have a print edition, to where we could have all the bloody illustrations for the rocks were there. So don't worry about my having to worry on that. I have a great big stash down in the basement.
I know you also want to do the second Fog novel.
Well, I'm doing that as we speak.
Yeah. Can you just publish a picture book for those of us who can't read?
Yeah, that was what I would want to have. And Christine Janis said the only thing the book was missing for college level was illustrations. And I go, duh, because I didn't have the rights to the illustrations. I know all the stuff I would want in there. There are particular charts from particular things. Theoretically, I could track that down, but I would prefer if I can eventually get a real live publisher to pick up the work and arrange to do all that heavy lifting for a proper print edition. So anybody out there who knows a literary agent and or publishers that should say, hey, Rocks Were There needs to have a print edition, let them know, have them contact me, and so forth and so on, and maybe we can get that little ball rolling, because I have the material. Anything that is reptile mammal transition related, I have been keeping track of all of that in a stash, so that when I need to do a new edition of the book that would be updated, that can be done. But yeah, I'm basically multitasking the Fog story and Rocks Were There and Tip and the Evolution Hour and prepping for the new book beyond that all at the same time. And so I'm taxing my little multitasking neurons to the
must be nice. I do. Well, we're gonna finish Rocks, and that should be out. And that we're pretty close. We're at about the halfway point. So
we're farther than halfway. And I'm making sure that the indexing is already structured, and the master bibliography and referencing and all
the master bibliography.
The master bibliography to make sure all of that is kept in play. And
I'm not saying anything. Stop it.
So we got that one coming. Then I've got something I want to finish, and then we'll be getting to the secret project.
The secret project. Yeah, so that will be a 2020 project. We're hoping that we can get the Rocks Were There out in time for people to get as Christmas presents.
That's the hope. School is about to jump on me.
Guys, I think that was a hint.
Well, school is about to jump on me real hard, so
and
this is an interesting show tonight.
Yeah, it's book writing, and particularly collaborative book writing. But I have to say, Jackson is a delightful person to work with in that regard. We track along. We track along in good ways. We write in a relatively similar manner. And between the two of us, he sees things that I don't, and hopefully I'm seeing things that he doesn't. And between the two of us, we're...
Did you say you hope? Is that a hope?
I do hope.
Yeah, I heard. I think your writing is a lot funnier than mine.
I do like a certain degree of humor, and I have a stiletto in my humor often, and it is that case. And the other, so I'm a weird combination of a snarky scholar. So I can be as techno geeky as you like. At the same time, I also like a good joke and a nice pun, and to riff off of things, especially when somebody hands you a good straight line, which the creationists often do. And I'm sure you've noticed already how I often play around with their own texts, like riddle me this and all of that.
That's true. I think the last joke I remember making in the text was in chapter 6 with the line about how you could just quote like this segment from Matthew, and you won't die if you eat puffer fish.
Oh yeah, yeah, and that was a good a bit to it. But it's impossible to avoid discussions of the religion angle because the creationists are ramming it under your nose in the answers books, and they will go out of their way. They'll have a section on the vestigial organ issue that starts off with a harangue on abortion. And
Yeah.
so, you're going, oh, excuse me. Okay, I think we have to kind of deal with that before we can get to whether or not you've even got your science facts straight, which they don't.
Andy Lord says in the side chat, snarky RJ is best RJ.
Yes, I minored in snarky in college, apparently.
It's it's very weird. I think we well, in my opinion, I'm kind of glad we got to tackle the whole people are using embryology as a science to argue for abortion. It's like I'm glad we tackle that in a very objective way.
Yeah.
We don't have to give you our opinion on anything, but we can still go, what the actual heck are you talking about?
Yeah, and so these are issues that are unavoidable. The one thing we want from the Rocks book is that even more so than Slam Dunk, if you didn't know diddly squat about the creation evolution issue and all of its many ramifications, you're going to be up to speed after you've read our book.
Oh yeah, this will be the probably the most comprehensive book on this topic, maybe ever.
Yeah, I did say to Joel Duff, he's done some absolutely spectacular postings that I've been incorporating into the Berriman chapter as well. But I said, that really, I urge him to write a book on creationist systematics because he is really up on a lot of this stuff. He has visited the Ark Encounter and apparently took lots of notes. And so he said, oh, I could do dozens of posts on these things. And I go, you should write a book.
Yeah, definitely. That'd be
because
awesome.
it would be absolutely delightful. And we'll see whether or not that goes in there. And he's obviously written some other material. He posted a book chapter on which I'm incorporating as well, where he goes into how creationists don't like to think about the Hawaiian island seamount chain. And they literally just don't want to think about, when did that happen? Is it Precambrian pre-flood? Is it post-flood? When exactly is that? And their brains just turn off. There's a whole chain of islands that is just screaming to be accounted for, and they can't do it.
Well, I mean, toss it on the pile. So
yeah, I know this is going to be a tremendous, astonishing, impossible to believe thing, but the creationists have avoided explaining a lot of the data. I know. Shock.
I'm shocked.
Absolutely shocked to hear that. Well, we're about to the half-hour mode here, so our wonderful friend Cy Strike can put up my shameless plug and my thanking of the patrons. And as soon as I see that on the screen, there we go. I would like to thank everybody. The money that has been coming in from all of you patrons as a regular operation that I can count on every month has been just I won't say a godsend because that would be a weird thing to say for an atheist send. And a free thinker sent, and a human helping out humans because this is important stuff sent. So anyway, we've got Hendril and Puffalophagus and Eric Rowley and Surus. And in our researcher level, we've got Travis and Convert Me and Eat Meal and Brad Johnson and Ralph McFadden and Pelagia, yay Pelagia, Benjamin Simpson, hi, and Ugly German Truths and I don't think they're ugly German truths at all. And Sura Weisbaum and our assistants Mike and Duranko and James and Nana, who reaffirmed support just this last week, and Todas Real, and our friends Daniel and Stephen Bauman and Marigale Beddoes and Insects Are Cool and Morton Nielsen and Bo Howell, Rasmussen and Staggles and Alex Stone and Paul Williams. And I will continue to thank the legacy patrons, Jen and Jody and John and Keith and Andrew and Dyer and Yui and Mona and Daniel and Son and Everett and Zeshi, who were able to help and then couldn't keep it up as a sustaining thing, but nevertheless you did help, and I am entirely grateful for all of that. And so you can flip to the second page where we've got our links to all of our fun and game stuff. The main website where you can find links to all my books, and you've got the GoFundMe and Patreon.com specifically for that. Help thank you, every single one of you who has done that. And the more the merrier, the easier it gets, so that I don't have to decide between paper and food, and that can keep the mill going in terms of the processing of the information. So you can keep the shameless plug available to put up at the end of the video, and that takes care of that. Anyway, I appreciate absolutely, as somebody who is just a face out in the middle of Spokane, Washington, that virtually none of you have ever physically met. And so you don't know whether I'm a digital simulation or whether I'm a real person, if you think about it in a matrix way. But nonetheless, the fact that so many people have stepped up and said,
Mr. Anderson.
yes, yeah. So anyway, that's where we're going on that. The second half of the program, remember our dear Denise O'Leary Jackson?
Indeed, unfortunately.
Yeah, she is the gift that keeps on giving. Just when you think she's a Canadian intelligent design advocate who is an embodiment.
I don't usually use that phrase unless it's somewhat of an insult. So,
and in her case, it is an insult.
Okay.
And anyway, Denise O'Leary, if you've ever had the misfortune to try to go through one of her very many posts at Evolution News and also at Uncommon Descent, which she's kind of running now, which was Bill Dembski's old anti-evolution website. She is a monument to secondary source citation and pot shotting. A lot of her posts would be several pages of text where she would have link after link after link after link after link to supposed science works that she's saying are just lame, 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 lame. She doesn't discuss content much. And the vast majority of those are secondary citations, linkages to the BBC America discussion of the science paper, or the commentary piece about the science paper, or the press release about the science paper. Very, very rarely about the science paper.
Journalists are the best scientists.
Right. So anyway, Andy Lord says, my science enthusiasm is exponentially more pronounced thanks to you, James Downard. Well, I'm glad you appreciate it. I'm here to try to plug away as long as I can on the matter. So back to Denise O'Leary. She decided to weigh in by linking to, here's the daisy chain, to an Evolution News posting, which is an excerpt apparently from this new book from, let's see who, it's The Lovable Venus Flytrap, a Design Analysis, which is a book excerpt from Marcos Eberlin, who is one of their new little pundits in the design camp. And the Lovable Venus Flytrap, if you actually look through all of that, they're mentioning some of the plants. At no point
I've had one of those.
Oh, aren't they fun?
Yeah.
At no point is he citing any technical literature. And at no point does he really explain what is the point about designing these things. Why? Well, jump in, Jackson.
We did in a recent video.
Yes, indeed you did. And the fun part is that there
What's the title of that video, Jackson? Do you remember?
Flower evolution.
Yeah. Yeah. And the fun part is that this is not exactly a news bulletin. So I put a link up to a 2009 paper, 10 years old, Evolving Darwin's Most Wonderful Plant, Ecological Steps to a Snap Trap, where they had worked out in meticulous detail the multi-stages that can lead from a non-carnivorous plant to a carnivorous plant. And the science didn't stop there. The other one that I put a direct link up to is the Venus Flytrap Carnivorous Lifestyle Builds on Herbivore Defense Strategies from Felix Bem from 2016. That shows how the mechanisms they use to eat critters is building off of the defense mechanisms that had evolved long before that in these various forms. And it's the reason why this process occurs multiple times. It evolves over and over and over again, because these things can track into facultative carnivory in multiple lineages, and their distribution around in places makes sense biogeographically and all of that. So darn, it's almost like the scientists want to do the work, and Denise O'Leary's intelligent design people don't think that there's work they need to do.
So basically, she's a tertiary source then.
Oh yeah, exactly.
Possibly even a quaternary one. She's possibly Cenozoic, positively Cenozoic.
Yes, parts of her brain are, I think, Precambrian. Anyway, Old Scratch asks, are you guys going to release it in audiobook too?
Oh,
I am still recording the segments for the Paralogs of Fogs audiobook, the first one of those. And Asurus, who's been helping out on that, has a whole bunch of things in the air. And so that's been on something of a hold, which we hope to get back to in due course once I finish the next book. The tougher nut to crack is going to be audiobook of a science work, that it functionally requires radical rewriting, because the last thing anybody wants to hear is somebody reading a paragraph of footnote references. So
what? Get out.
read in
I'll do
linear
it, guys.
form.
I'll do it.
Karis, you don't know what you're Karis,
Yes,
you don't know what you're
Karis
offering.
Karis could pull that off.
Oh no,
But-
I mean I would love to listen to
For
Karis.
a fundraiser, you guys donate $100 and I'll read a paragraph.
Yes, I can just hear you going, Schmidt et al. 2009,
Oh,
Barbary
God.
2004.
I would definitely listen to that. Like it could
I
lull
got
me to sleep.
myself
that's
That
scholarship.
was the last time I had Edgar Allan Poe.
Anyway, it requires restructuring the whole text format for an audio only thing. And I'm still kind of daunted in my head to figure out how to do that. But yes, I have that as a potential project to do The Rocks Were Still There. And then we would be doing the same thing in principle, theoretically, for the other books. So we'll see. That's one. How many more balls can I juggle on my plate at one time? I don't know. The main point is to get the book out.
Big yikes.
Into print form. Yeah, yikes indeed. It's a daunting thing when you tackle, and Jackson, I'm sure absolutely agrees on this one, is that when you move from doing video postings or articles or even fairly extended discourse to go to a full-blown book level, you realize you have to ratchet it up to a whole new level of documentation and thoroughness. And it's a daunting task. Martin Gardner, who was an old mathematics guy, and if you haven't ever read his Fads and Fallacies in the Name of Science, let me put that in the link here. It's still an absolutely super duper analysis of a lot of flat earthers and section on Velikovsky and psychic research. It's a very old book from the mid 1950s, but it's still very much a benchmark in terms of the methodology. Anyway, for years, he wrote a mathematics science column at Scientific American. And he at one point said that if you want to know how little you know about a subject, decide to write a book about it. And that's been sage advice, that it just ups the ante of going, whoa, okay, that little paragraph I thought, that's actually kind of thin. If I were to read it in a book, I need to research more to make that more solid. And it is a task that's useful, in that if you do try to write a book and you accomplish it, you've done something.
That is true. Well, we'll get back there eventually. Yeah, I've for my own secret project that I've been doing on the side, I've been running into that issue, especially with regard to protists. There are so many protists.
Yeah, and this is the thing that is both exciting and intimidating, and revealing as to why creationists can't ever get a grip on anything, is of how incredibly diverse organisms are. And a lot of what's going on in those little miscellaneous little critters that you have to see at a microscope, that's what dominated billions of years of life. And
they're okay generally with them being very intricate and diverse, and they'll just point right back to God and say, see, that just makes him that much more, wonderful and spectacular and
They
everything.
point with their flagella.
Yeah, except if they do nasty shit. And that's where things get to be fun.
Nobody likes Vibrio.
Start thinking about how many nematodes there are, and I think I've heard that there's at least 500,000 species, and there are probably 1 million that they just haven't found.
Oh yeah.
And that if you think about where most of them live, in places that if you think about where they live, you realize you don't want to think about where they live. that you have to think, is a designer really the reason why they're doing what they're doing?
No,
You know
that's
what-
only because sin entered the earth by the fall. So
yes,
it's not God. It was Adam and Eve's fault for bringing sin and death into earth. Blah blah. Anyway, I'm
Well,
just
sin and death really like hookworms, I
I
guess.
think we've got some sections along the way in the book where we address that point of that if you try to think about what the parasite would have been doing pre-fall, it doesn't make sense.
Oh, I actually just read a section about that. The part where you're writing about the little chitin
Oh
degrading.
yes, chitin. Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Those are absolutely delightful. Yeah, that was the one that I was thinking of, where creationists were trying to argue that the reason why there were all these little organisms with chitin, that there were bacteria that needed to eat them up, otherwise we'd be up to our armpits in chitin. Forgetting the fact that if they're young Earth creationists, there wouldn't have been time to get up to our armpits in chitin, so they were actually thinking in billions of years. The problem is when you look in detail at what the little bacterium does that breaks down chitin, it isn't something reacting to chitin, it's other things. And that's a byproduct. And as it turns out, they're doing other things that are really nasty, and that's because they can break down chitin.
this is so incredibly vague.
Yeah, that's
We're
that's
referring
a teaser
to.
for reading chapter 6 of the new book when it comes out.
Oh, gotcha.
Oh,
Are you going to clarify more there?
Nope. You get nothing, and you'll have to like it.
Yeah, the thing is that in fact, I have a whole pile of material that I've been collecting over the years. You can argue that a thing could be taking on a new
It
bad
was Vibrio. Okay.
after it's designed. But if the thing that it's doing badly is because it's doing what it does naturally and it's not an add-on, it's what it does. In other words, you would have to think that the bad thing was designed into it to begin with. And there are an awful lot of examples of those in the biological field. And creationists and intelligent design advocates, they're on the same hook. That if you try to argue, okay, is it designed? That's why I like to bring up ALUs. If anybody brings up, here's the chain of logic that I use on Twitter. Somebody says, "Ooh, who designed the information in DNA?" And I'll go, "Oh, define information, A, and B, tell us, is the information in all the ALUs in our genome the same or different?" And they never actually get that far because there's nothing in the creationist literature that would allow them to answer that question. So they're just basically at sea. But if they ever did get to the next step, I would say, okay, now what about all the ALUs that cause disease? Uh-oh, which means that they were deliberately designed to do that to begin with? Oh no, there is a landmine in there that you can come in from the information to ALUs. I can never remember can you remember what the damned acronym stands for, ALU?
No, I don't remember.
Yeah,
No.
I don't remember it either. It's an acronym. Anyway, there are about 10% of the human genome is ALU. It's a retrotransposon, which means it came from outside and it has a copy me code that got intruded into the genetic system in primates. It predates us. And they basically say, copy me, copy me, copy me, copy me, copy me, but it doesn't have a readme.
Oh.
So it piles up and piles up and piles up. About 200 every generation are adding on. And most of the time they don't do a damn thing because they don't have a readme signal. So when the gene is transcribed, it's just edited out and boop, and no problem. But every once in a while, a mutation can turn the front end of it into a start codon, which means readme. And that usually is a problem because it's stuck in the middle of a protein where there's all these little copies suddenly getting transcribed and changing the protein fold and causing there to be problems. Now, once in a while, that start codon actually is nice and it accidentally is useful. And it turns out that there is functions in our brain that make use of ALU components. So there's both the yin and the yang. If you're going to argue that the designy stuff for the brain part is designy, then all the nasty diseases caused by the ALUs are designy too, and you have a problem. That is called the theodicy problem, which
No, it was all Satan.
Yeah. Oh, yes. It's just.
Internal chat, you two.
Oh, Brian Stevens says Arthrobacter luteus restriction endonuclease. Thank you, Brian. You are way ahead of us. and now you know why neither one of us remember the damn name. Arthrobacter luteus restriction endonuclease.
Oh my
Patooey.
God. RJ, look at internal chat.
Oh, I wonder if RJ sounds like the cat's previous owner. Oh my.
It's too bad Karis and Psystrike didn't write it down first. They're always behind.
Yeah, well, that's where Google is handy, but it's one of those things where it's just way easier to say bloody ALU. There's a cousin to it, which I think is B something or other, that's found in rats. That's performs exactly the same kind of function in the rodents. And I alluded to it in Evolution Slam Dunk. Yet another reason for all of those who do not have Evolution Slam Dunk to get Evolution Slam Dunk. That way you can be all up to speed on this stuff. Yeah, you can't imagine how antsy I have been to not want to mention that future project that you don't want me to talk about.
Oh, I can imagine.
Well,
to be a delightful one.
It's something we don't usually talk about, but I get more and more annoyed by the day regarding that topic. So,
and it's a topic that you would think has been done to death, but I think both of us see things that haven't been properly covered.
Right. I'm not exactly impressed.
Integrated, and there is a pileup of scientific information relating to this topic that has not been properly assessed, except occasionally in blogs, and that's a dead giveaway that we've got something new to add to this. Is that as vague a teaser as you could possibly imagine?
I agree wholeheartedly with all of that. I do want to say, you're right. I'm not terribly impressed with the writings that have already been done on the subject generally. I'm sure there are some gold mines out there.
Even by famous people.
Even by famous people. Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree. Is that big enough for everybody?
Yeah, and so it's an area where scholars have been thrashing it over for a very long time. And the same arguments get used over and over and over again.
Yep.
And so many of them fail to think through the consequences of their own arguments.
Mm-hmm.
And it's way too philosophical for its own good. I think what we'll be doing in part is applying a source methods approach to this issue.
Yeah, well, to an extent, some of it will have to be based in philosophy, but at the same time, even that can be analyzed.
It's what gets left out.
Yep.
And I've already written in parallel on this, and I'll be incorporating a lot of that little information.
You did, you have.
Just have oodles of historical stuff in it.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's really kind of 1/3 science, third history, and a third philosophy. It's kind of, you have to take all of those if you want to argue this topic effectively.
And what I've been finding out, even in researching some of these side issues, is that a surprisingly large amount of, including scholarly journal work, is now accessible in a way that if we were trying to do this 10 years ago, it wouldn't be.
True, that's true. Well, at any rate, we've been talking past the audience for several minutes now.
I know. This is the most coy thing I could possibly imagine. So
they've probably all gone to go get toast.
Yeah. You need more toast. You gonna put some jam on your toast, Karis?
Not this particular time. I had honey, local honey. I love local
peanut butter. Do you put peanut butter on your toast?
On occasion. Why are we talking about my toast?
I don't know.
I guess I started.
Oh, by the way, I hope this illustrates as to why secular people who like evolution are incredibly humorless and dull.
Yeah, it's I don't know. We'll certainly have a lot to talk about with that secret project.
Yeah. It'll be the one that we'll be getting into. The main thing is I've been trying to uphold my end on the project. I'll tell you right off the bat, most of the heavy lifting structure of the work is Jackson's doing on on the Rocks Were There. And so this is a thing that would have been very daunting to have tackled, not one, not two, not three, but 4 bloody Answers in Genesis Answers books, and to explore at depth that range of material and yet do it in a way that keeps all of the things coherent and structured. You've done a magnificent job on the overall ordering of things. And then I come in with my, ooh, that reminds me of this, and ooh, that connects up with that. And
well, it's
you could put pictures on your wall and like red strings connecting all of them.
If I reach that stage, please just cart me off.
We've got all the facts. That's all connecting. It's lined up.
Yes. No, my mind operates very differently from that in terms of the advantages of being able to write in word processors, where I can do text search, and the ability to see other material. I do have.
I don't have mine on a wall. I do mine in 3D.
I do. Well, we all have our own tricks that we can do to construct things. I have kind of like a retentive mind if I've written it down. And so the advantage of having things in a master reference bibliography
master bibliography.
You're just I'll tell you, my master bibliography is one that I work on. I open my master bibliography and I massage my master bibliography every single day.
Just rub it in, RJ. Just rub
We're
it
telling Jackson.
I can't be here. I'm too young for this.
You poor young thing, you. Yes. Well, you get off on your rocks and your scorpion.
Oh, big yikes.
Anyway, the point I'm trying to make about the structure of the thing is that
at least twice a week.
Yeah, at least twice. Oh, sometimes more than that.
You're undercutting it.
Is that
RJ and I work on the rocks every day.
Each of us has each human being who wants to get into the field of doing analytical work or writing apologetics and discussions of matters should find their own particular way of getting a handle on the data field. And you should now listen here, kids. Calm down. Get a room.
It was curious. I didn't do it.
That was just so boring, though. Get more adventurous.
I know the scatological bathroom humor is a legitimate point.
That's true.
That the data field is gigantic, and you can easily feel intimidated by the fact that there is so much work out there that you would have to assess. Oh my gosh, we're losing it. I tell you. Cy, are you following all of how we're completely losing it here?
Well, my whole thing with the structuring was really I just took
the point.
I just flipped through the table of contents in each of the 4, and I just kind of grouped them together based on subject material. At first, I thought we were going to do basically a chapter, a chapter, because with Monty White, he just pulled in so much material. Yeah. That it was just massive responding to that one piece, but at the same time it gave us a chance to hit some of the major tropes so that we wouldn't have to cover them again later. So that same with I think chapter 2 we kind of covered. Well, we covered
I've got to mention Andy Lord here asking if I am a cunning linguist or a master debater. Both, oh boy, both.
But
you told me I was barking at the wrong tree, RJ.
Hey, my tree can be barked up anytime I want.
Oh Lord. But after that, after the Monty White chapter, we basically grouped everyone else based on subject material, and so we just broke it up into sub chapters. Each chapter has maybe 4 or 5 subchapters.
Yeah, and once I got onto that, it was a trick I used in Slam Dunk of having subheadings that were listed right up in the table of contents that acts as like a major guide to where the superstructure of the story is, even without having to use the index. And then I adapted that to the new book in the same format. So you could have a title of the chapter that's fairly innocuous, but the meat of the thing is popping up in the subsections that are down below, and that allows you to remember context of things and major topic issues and all that. The other problem that we've been encountering all the way through is how bloody repetitive so many of the posters are, where they're hitting the same tropes over and over and over again, to where, you know, you're going, oh my God, not yet another one.
Well, yeah, I mean, oh crap, what's his name? The first guy who does the he's the first guy we talked about. Is it Gary? It's the first guy we talk about in chapter 6. He, like, we only take a single paragraph out of his whole chapter because that's the only novel bit of information.
Oh yeah, I've forgotten his name as well. Yeah,
Yeah, but I can figure it out. But
but
yeah,
it was such a pregnant notion. There's another allusion that a big chunk of the argument.
Gary Parker.
Gary Parker, yeah, he's an old school creationist. He dates from the Henry Morris era, 1970s, 1980s, and he's still knocking around. And so he's one of their venerable old guys. And unlike yours truly, humbly, he hasn't learned new tricks. And so he's basically trotting out the same old material. And a big chunk of our argument is, okay, they brought this topic onto the field, okay? They don't really think through what this means. They don't explore the relevant information. They're missing this and this and this and this and this and this and this. Are we getting a pattern here?
Yeah, it's yeah, with him it was, we'd already covered all of the, basically all the tropes, because he brought up kinds sort of, and genetic entropy sort of, but we of course already talked about, or dedicated whole sections to that. So he had a single paragraph in an entire chapter that was actually, novel information. Mike Riddle was kind of the same way with his information chapter.
Yeah.
It's only like 2 or 3 paragraphs that meant anything.
And he does the same thing with radiometric dating, that he's essentially troping off of secondary people that he never fact checks. Kara says, if you're seeing this, please compile all of RJ's unintended double entendres. But the one, if there's anybody in there that's going to be really disgruntled at what we're criticizing, I think it's Georgia Purdom.
I think that's true, and we always stand erect to counter her material. So.
Oh!
You really had to go there, didn't you? You had to do it.
We're corrupting Jackson as we go. But what really amazes me is, and we're constantly alluding to it, is if there's anybody who has no call to be so genetically ignorant as Purdom, it's Purdom, because she has a bloody degree in it. Mm-hmm. And so the fact that she is dancing around these subject matters as superficially is the counterpart that I can think of is Kurt Wise, who has a paleontology degree, and therefore he has no business being as obtuse as he appears to be.
Kurt Wise deconverted me from Christianity.
Oh, tell us about that.
Wow.
He was the last straw for me, but when he basically said that even if all the evidence was to point to, this or that against the Bible, he would still be obligated to go with what the Bible says and not compromise his faith in God. I took that to mean that truth is expendable, and Jesus is all that matters, damn the truth. And I'm not like that. So that was the last straw for me. And Kurt Wise was the last straw. Once I read that from him, I was done. Yeah, so thank you, Kurt. The truth has set me free.
Indeed. Hugh Ross is functionally in that same ballpark. He is an older creationist, but he has explicitly said that if he thought the Bible taught the earth was young, he would reject all of his physics.
Yeah, I mean, Wise studied under Gould himself.
Yeah, which must have been absolutely fascinating. Wise, to his discredit, made the disaster. Actually, I should thank all the different creationists, because not one, not two, but 3 different creationists have independently lobbed a recent lecture, 2018, by Kurt Wise on the geologic column and paleocurrents and stuff. It's like an hour long. They think this is terribly impressive. And I finally got around to watching it, and it's going in the new book, because he jumps off the gangplank on this absolutely twaddle notion that they have been able to identify the incoming floodwaters all going one direction and the outgoing floodwaters all going the opposite direction from these supposed paleo currents. No, they didn't. And Wise never bothered to fact check it.
It's left to right, isn't it?
Yeah, it's up and down and in and out and over and under, round and through.
Oh, wow.
I mean,
I just can't take it all.
I can't. I mean, I don't know how any of them take themselves seriously when they talk about, oh, the water laid down the sediment.
Well, remember their subculture, that they're lecturing in front of an audience of people who believe exactly as they do. And so what you're getting is a reinforcement mechanism like Donald Trump at one of his rallies. And I'm sure the adrenaline is rushing, the endorphins are flowing, they are feeling enabled and happy, and their views are being reinforced.
Well,
Now,
that's
whether they would
huge part of what apologetics is for. It's not just for drawing in unbelievers to the flock. It's for reinforcing their shield of faith against the fiery darts of the enemy.
Yeah.
So if there is any way they can reinforce that faith, that is a huge part of the very purpose of all this young earth creationist stuff, not just for us, the evil secularists, but for their own flock.
TD Lane says the water is going diagonally.
The water. I would like to take a sip of water.
Yeah, the offenders here are Chadwick, and I've forgotten the other one. I think Whitmire is involved in it, and here's where the disaster came in for them.
Oh, here it is.
Kurt Wise actually says that he helped collect some of the data. They would go through and plow through masses of PhD theses and geological papers, marking down any paleocurrent information. And they posted this as a paper on one of the Nature journals, the Nature Data, not the Nature magazine. It's a perfectly beautiful data set. It's magnificent. It's 100,000 data points. It's gigantic. And that's their undoing, because anybody can download it. Anybody can look at the data field and find out, they're cherry picking, and the data doesn't match their model. I can't remember whether it's Trey the Explainer or somebody else actually did a video exploring this very point ahead of me at the same point that I was going, that's interesting. He did the thing, and it'll be referenced to work. Yeah, it's Source Methods is the killer app here, and all you have to do is to have the audacity of a child to not listen to the bullshit, instead to say, source please, and how did you check it, and how can we check it? And if people started doing that, they're in trouble.
I had a creationist send me a paper just a few weeks ago, and it's I've already done a write-up of it in the book. It actually is relevant to the chapter I'm working on currently. Mm-hmm. It's hilariously bad. It's so bad, I'm not even sure that she read it when she sent it or before she sent it to me. Aside from, it has very bizarre spelling mistakes in some of its long quotations, and I figured out why. Because the person transcribed audio but didn't know the taxa, and so misspelled all the taxa. Yeah, so what was interesting is it was an Italian to English in a documentary, and so the person who was, I guess, just a translator was pronouncing these names, and so the person transcribed that, and I was like, what are these words? Oh, that's why, because the documentary is on YouTube, free to watch.
Oh, another little in joke here that you're going to get a big kick out of. I mentioned the White Cliffs of Dover. A creationist was complaining to me about how do you account for the Chalk Cliffs of Dover. So I decided to do some background research on it.
How do creationists account for it?
It turns out the main area was Andrew Snelling, but Andrew Snelling turns out to be relying on somebody else for the claim that the cliffs can form rapidly. And guess who is the person he's relying on? Ariel Roth.
Oh, Lord.
Oh.
Okay, for the audience, who is Ariel Roth?
Ariel Roth is a younger creationist who we are, Jackson got me on. He sent me the book because Ariel Roth makes some cockamamie, awful, inaccurate claims about coral formation. And so you can take it from here about why Ariel Roth is not to be taken seriously.
Well, so yeah, so of course we're reading the Answers book, and the Answers book cites Roth, and I figured first, okay, maybe his claims are, somewhere else and we can find them. No, they originate within that book because he made them up. He makes up the rates of coral growth. I mean, it's
cited external papers for it to boot.
He did. You can actually go. All the papers he cites are free, or you can find them.
And don't say what he claims.
Yeah, no, it's he cites it like over twice as much, or over twice as fast as it can actually grow, which is just insane. I had to look through like a whole bunch of different papers on corals, and I was like, why are none of these saying?
Yeah, Jackson was head scratching, and we were going back and forth in Twitter messages to each other about this for quite some time. But eventually, the neat thing is some of this stuff goes back to like 1911. It's some real old stuff. And to find that this stuff was available as full text downloads when we scavenged and scavenged and scavenged, oh, it was like the gold mine. And all you needed to do was to see the original material. Not only did you get more respect for the scientists who had done the original work, but you see, Ariel, you just made this shit up.
Yeah, he's not even.
They made shit up.
Yeah, I was thinking, Sean.
Right.
I mean, it's not like he's cherry picking data. He's
making it up.
So,
and then along comes these other people who copy Ariel Roth as an authority figure.
Yeah. In the Navy, we call this error carried forward.
Yeah. And there is the daisy chain, and that's where being able to track down the original material is all absolutely critical. Well, we're well past the hour on that point. Have you seen any question other than T.D. Lane pointing out that tides are leftist propaganda? Yeah, I like that. We're pretty much at the end of the show. You can put up my thank you note there, Cy, and we can conclude the program until next week. Thank you, Cy.
Thank you, guys. Thank you, everybody, for.
Thank you, Karis. Thank you, Jackson.
It was a pleasure and an honor. Thank you.
And keep doing science and earth stuff, because